Welcome, everyone. Welcome and thank you for coming to our very special event tonight. This is the 18th annual reading for the Pennsylvania Public Poetry Project. My name is Ellysa Cahoy, and I am so proud to serve as an assistant director of the Pennsylvania Center for the Book. Now, just a few housekeeping items before we get started. There is going to be a book sale right over there and a poster signing right here following the event, and we are going to have posters for everybody featuring all 4 of our poets tonight. So you absolutely want to stick around for that immediately following the event. But before we begin, I do want to acknowledge the contributions of some of the people in this room tonight. First and foremost, we would like to thank our Dean Barbara Dewey for sponsoring the Pennsylvania Center for the Book and for her support of this event. And then I have a whole bunch of other thanks, so I'm going to ask you to hold your applause until the end now. Thank you to our Associate Deans, Joe Salem and Karen Aslant. Thank you to our Public Poetry Advisory Board members, some of whom are here with us tonight. Bill Brockman, Jose Guerrero, Julia Kasdorf, Shara McCallum, Christopher Walker, and Stephen Herb. We thank them for their guidance and support. Thank you to the English department for their sponsorship of this event. Thank you to, sitting right there in the second row, Nathan Valchar. He is the man who designed these posters that you see up here tonight, and we are very thankful to him. That does deserve its own hand for his amazing design work. Thank you as well to James McCready, right over there from the libraries, for his participation in our book sale. Thank you to everyone who's helping us record this event tonight. Mara Katria and Jeff Ungar for filming this event, and our colleagues at Media Site Live. We are streaming this event live right now. And thank you, too, to our American Sign Language interpreters, Kate Blank and Wendy Grossman. We truly appreciate all of the work that you have put into preparing for this event. We want to say a thank you to our faculty and staff of the Pennsylvania Center for the Book, and a big thank you to the person who puts this entire event together, our outreach coordinator, Caroline Weremuth. Thank you to our 2018 Public Poetry Project Selection Committee, Fred Shaw, poet and instructor at Point Park University, Laura Spagnoli. She is a poet and associate professor of instruction in French at Temple University, and Meg Day, poet and assistant professor of English and creative writing at Franklin Marshall College. We are indebted to each of them for sharing their expertise with us, and they chose our 4 featured poets tonight. To give you a little background on our project, the Public Poetry Project features on poets with a connection to Pennsylvania, and we display this poetry on posters in public places to make it a part of the daily lives of a greater number of people. And since the project began in 2000, 81 individual poems have been printed and placed in public places in thousands of places throughout Pennsylvania, bringing poetry that much closer to everyone in Pennsylvania in their daily lives. And tonight, we showcase 4 poets and their poems selected by our judges for this honor. And it's now my pleasure to introduce Bill Brockman. He is the Paterno Family Librarian for Literature, and he is also our MC for tonight's program. Please join me in welcoming Bill.
Good evening, everybody, and I'm glad to see you all here. Before we get started, I just wanted to mention a new program that the library has started this year, which is a short story competition entitled New Beginnings. And we're doing this in collaboration with a French company called Short Edition. You may have seen the canisters, the dispensers, whatever you want to call them, at our various doors to this building, that will spit out short stories, either of 5 minutes length, 3 minutes length, or 1 minute in length. We'd like to add Penn State's contribution to these dispensers, so we're running a competition, and we're asking for people to contribute short stories. Information is on the library's website, so I won't go into it in great detail here. But the deadline is April 20th, and those of you who are interested in writing short stories, please consider contributing. Now, we'll get started with the program. First of all, my own thanks to Carolyn, who runs the show and keeps everybody in line. I'll be giving brief introductions to each of our four poets tonight, and I'll be including some comments from the jury members who actually selected the poems. Unfortunately, most of them can't be here. Meg Day apparently is on her way, but she's not here yet, so I'll have to quote everybody. So first is Thomas Devaney. Thomas Devaney is a visiting assistant professor of English at Haverford College. He was the University of Pennsylvania's program coordinator for the Kelly Writers House and was a senior writing fellow and won the Distinguished Teaching Award from Penn's critical writing program in 2008. He also taught at Brooklyn College. Thomas Devaney's books include Runaway Goat Cart, 2015, Calamity Jane in 2014, The Picture That Remains, 2014 also, A Series of Small Boxes, 2007, Letters to Ernesto Neto, 2005, The American Pragmatist Fell in Love, 1999, and he's published poems and essays in American Poetry Review, Bomb Magazine, Fence, and the Philadelphia Inquirer, among other places. Thomas Devaney won a Pew Fellowship for the Arts in Poetry in 2014, and he's been a fellow at the MacDowell Colony, the Camargo Foundation, and the Banff Center. Laura Spagnoli's comments about Thomas Devaney's poem that's reproduced on our poster here entitled The Blue Stoop read as follows. The Blue Stoop is a love letter to a bygone place, or more precisely, a bygone group of people who frequented the titular Blue Stoop. The poem opens conversationally with a question addressed to these people. Who remembers the Blue Stoop? But from this simple beginning, Devaney recreates an entire world with a litany of names and recollections. There is no wallowing in nostalgia here, only laughter and awe as the poem draws the reader into this world of people and music, old sayings and old ways. And in doing so, even though the poem is an homage to this specific community around the Blue Stoop, where the poet asserts his own sense of belongings and encompasses much more. Unfortunately, Thomas Devaney really wanted to be here tonight, but due to family health issues in California, can't be here. So he asked us to read two of his poems, one entitled Where in the Great Glare Was I, and then The Blue Stoop. And I'll read them right now. Where in the great glare was I? Under the sun, I saw two kids along a long fence walking, and then fast to a cut, and then we all were gone. I saw an empty delivery truck with its back opened as it sped away, twice in the same day. There was a side field under the sun, and I could see that the grass was wet and dense with some night still in it. It had to be freshly cut, but there were no mowers or municipal ground crews anywhere. A field in my nose, and even now not a soul to share it. On the edge of Chinatown, an older couple had just found a bench. They sat closely and looked straight ahead. One or the other patted the top of the other's hand. I saw that the secret source of light appeared from a brick pavement stained white at the edges. I saw a splash of little suns scatter and then restation themselves in the air, light speaking to light in the eyes of a pair of sunglasses. And next we have The Blue Stoop, Thomas Devaney. Who remembers the Blue Stoop? I'm laughing at the question. Who? Everybody. All the names. Like an early book of the Bible, it isn't just names. They go deep and make three wide steps, three very wide steps, and everywhere. There's Franny and Kim, Amy, Gary, and George, Dawn Ann and her red-headed brother Bobby, B.A., Matthew, Paula, and Rob, Tommy Fliss and all the Flisses, goddamn Steve Fliss. Steve smoking Fliss. Anthony's mother is leaning out of the window. Does she ever go out? Yes, every day. She leans out the window all day long. Anthony's uncle played the trumpet. Everybody knows that, but when we say he played the trumpet, we mean he played with everybody. Yes, Tony Bennett, but have you ever heard of Al Martino, Guy Lombardo? People, big bands, he played with them all, and in some third-floor heaven, he still is. People say, once upon a time, a call was a dime. They say more than I can say here, they're living. They say, don't forget where you're from. But I don't have to. I never left. Recently, somebody said that the Blue Stoop looks smaller than it used to. I guess they know what they're talking about. But don't tell that to Michael, Michael, and Michael, and a generation of roses weaned on a fresh coat of swimming pool paint every few years. All the dirty kid faces that will never be clean. Those are my faces. Thanks, Thomas Devaney. Next, we have Marcy Neligan. Marcy Neligan is an arts education programming coordinator at Millersville University, and she has taught creative writing at Franklin and Marshall College in Lancaster. Recently, in 2016, she published The Ghost Manada and has published Infinite Variations in 2011, both through Black Radish Books. She's published chapbooks entitled Dispatch, Specimen, and the Book of Knowledge, all from Ducey Press. She co-edited Intersection, Sidewalks, and Public Space in 2008, which is a series of essays about public spaces, urban spaces. She's published poems in Jacket, the Denver Quarterly, the New Orleans Review, How To, and other journals. And she tells me that she's currently working on a project looking at Troy, New York, and race relations there over the past couple of centuries. Is that more or less accurate? Meg Day, who I see just walked in, welcome, was one of our jurors and wrote of Marcy Nelligan's When You Guide the Rope Along the Flank, Go Steady, and wrote that it's a stunner, part incantation for possibility, part chronicle of future ineffables. This poem is all linguistic cinematography, lean with want. Nelligan's lines sit on the edge of explosion, transporting the reader into a snapshot moment so tense with kinetic energy that the world might be ending or beginning with one bite. And who could look away? Nelligan has assembled a rich, muscling prose poem, as gruesome as it is alluring, and so steady in its pacing, the brutality of its beauty sneaks up with surprising intimacy. Join me in welcoming Marcy Nelligan.
Oh man, I'm never going to live up to those words. Thank you all so much for having me. This is such an honor and such a wonderful program. Thank you to everyone who coordinated this. But Carolyn, thank you for everything you did to make us get here and your wonderful directions and just all of your support. So, I'm going to start with a poem that a friend of mine actually asked me to write an essay about poetry, and by accident it turned into a poem about poetry. So it's called To Whom It May Concern. Dear anyone, I am putting these words together. I am sending them to you, dear someone, in the curve of the oak leaves, where the light dapples into pictograph and memory. What I know of the world comes in at the eyes. Beech trees, a patch of deer-sucked grass. I am trying to lose my body again, trying to train my tongue to the filaments of light and root structure. Dear other, I'm not sure of you. You may not get it. Thin vein of spider thread sinking from the branches. New moss on the slate ruck I drug down that hill. The shade stalks the sun along the arc of the yard. Dear who, because of the attic stairs, because of the flower-dusted past, the futility of it all, because of the yeast in the air and the tenacity of ghosts. and how, though I try, I cannot describe a single thing the way it is. Cut an improbable channel through the land and reach me here, amid the chaos and bramble, work piled like wood to last 3 winters, children a yawl and a muddle. It's like farming, you'll say, and someone's got to eat. Dear everyone, whereas the history of language is sustenance you have sustained, openly mustn't admit to the hope in a wing or the manyness of blackbirds, your body breaking into blossom, the plink-plink of spring across its foolish meadows. But when we find ourselves beyond the ears of commerce, we confess like newfound Catholics. I admit it's crazy. I admit not a single tax break attends this labor. Yet the thin mule of a just-made thing must be some reason in it after all. The next poem I'm going to do, I was invited to be in this ekphrastic poetry situation where I was matched up with an artist and had to write a poem based on that person's work, and I was really excited about it because I love art. And I got my picture, and it was this absolutely stunning, gorgeous basket. And I had nothing to say about it at all. And luckily, the artist was super nice, and she said, you know, there's an interesting story behind the process that these baskets are made through, so you might want to ask me some questions. So indeed, I asked her some questions. So this is the poem that came of it. It's called The Lightship Basket. And the little brief backstory is that these, in Nantucket, off the coast of Nantucket, they didn't have lighthouses. They had these ships that were just sort of anchored in this very dangerous spot. And the men would be stuck on these ships for like a year, and they started making these beautiful baskets to sort of while away the hours. So the lightship basket. Around Nantucket, lanterns bobbed on lightships to guide safe course through surf-strewn rocks and shallows. The crew, old whalers waiting for night or dim weather's descent, wove wood-form baskets against the boredom of dying slowly out at sea. How we scheme against what we thought would never bend, but the world is vast and white and hungry. What to do but make a friendly vessel of our fears, a little air, a little light chinked through. Baskets made at sea hold everything but water. Myself, stubborn as ash stave, lashed round the curve of nothing, found a form in you, a wish of structure. It was a simple thought, to bind ourselves toward transport. I only wanted to contain it, to carry you out of land and into ocean, make a roost of twig and twine, some nest between ourselves and drowning. The next poem, there was this little poetry geek thing that was going around that maybe you saw, which was comparing Donald Trump's speech patterns to Gertrude Stein, which helped me through a few difficult moments. I had, prior to Trump bringing us his own version of Stein, written a sestina inspired by Stein, but also sort of aiming at the then Republicans, and so I thought I would trot it out. It's called Sestina. At first is an opening, not a beginning, not a start, but a freshness. In it, could they wonder? They could wonder. They are sitting, and in sitting is a question. They look, and they are asking. If they look, and in looking they are wondering, they are not thinking. Thinking is not a question, it is a comma. They are both the same. Everything is something. Could a period be a question? It could not. There was a simple question, and it was answered. In asking, they find that it is interesting. Not seeing the difference between a question and an answer is contemporary. A question is a verb, an answer is a noun, and could be a verb. A good question, a very good question, is an asking and a telling. They do not have a question. They wish very much to know something. They are looking everywhere for it. This is different than thinking. They are not asking if they answered, could they make it? They are trying naturally, and they are failing. A beginning is always present. A beginning is a use. They are beginning, and what changes after that is nothing. If they change it, could they change it? They could not. They have not asked, and they have answered. A question is not permanent. The wish to ask a question. Language is a questioning. Then we would have, then we could have, then we should. I made my students write a lot of sestinas, and they really loved me for that. They're really glad I changed careers. I'm going to read just one poem from my first book, Infinite Variations, which uses randomly selected text from The Origin of the Species and from the Old Testament. And I was interested in having a woman at the middle of those two creation stories. So I used the text, it's all found text in the poems, to rearrange things. Allow me to kiss between insect and insect, setting your face toward its lies. A parasite on the prey most foolishly checks his watch. Such humble joy to number their wits, while cats and mice speak of captive frequencies. All season or year, the American forests grow on ruin, caught up in a dream of false night, while war feeds its hands into habit. A problem of action, reaction, all striving, all knowing. Bodies like feathers fall, another potent entanglement. But how false the dependency, our beautiful view of trees we cannot see for all those trees. And the last poems I'm going to read are from my newest book, Ghost Monada, which is a long involvement with Cormac McCarthy's book, Blood Meridian, which, have you read Blood Meridian? It's excruciating. It's excruciatingly beautiful and excruciatingly horrifying, and there is not a woman in that book. So I got a little angry at him about that, and so I'm taking him to task, but also I'm really inspired by the beauty of his prose. So each poem begins with a quote from McCarthy and then goes on to my own poetry. Before man was, war waited for him, the ultimate trade awaiting its ultimate practitioner. That is the way it was and will be, that way and not some other way. Something fits into this emptiness, the way words conjugate our mouths. There was darkness at the center, so we filled it in with God, saints to walk the earth with their eyes in their hands, bleeding out fresh metaphors. Whole, dark hole, something spells there, foul-breathed and beautiful, pulls us ever in. What use the spear but the wound, the void's great capability? What sentence in the sequence of our names? And the horse was watching, out there past men's knowing, where the stars are drowning and whales ferry their vast souls through the black and seamless sea. What the ocean wants is everything. I, too, need such salt upon my tongue. The waves lift, the waves descend, a decorous measure once the body leans into the grave of its own longings, shrill as blue water, infinite mirror. Ocean, ocean, eat the past away like acid. If this is the wash, wash us wholly down. The man who believes that the secrets of the world are forever hidden lives in mystery and fear. I will tell you about the birds, the hunting birds and the nut birds, the birds who leave and those who stay. And here is a silver bird, Mercury in air, and the red bird who comes only in winter when the snow makes of it a wound and a holiness. It makes no difference if you know their names. They do not know them either. Call them the birds of discernment and the birds of sorrow, the birds of blackest malice or brightest beckoning. Their bones are hollow, their blood is cold. They require emptiness to place themselves, cannot discern clear glass from sky. Without them, there is silence and nowhere to impale your desires. But the songs they sing lodge in your ears like tiny, sharpened knives. Grass and prickly pear grew on the roofs, and goats walked about on them, and somewhere off in that squalid kingdom of mud, the sound of the little death bells tolled thinly. Berry mouth, mouth of spring, the animals alive, they stumble from their stupor. Sweet onion of the air, trillium and wolfbane, the trees burst with their hunger. What cold we became, lost to frost's full burial. Now upspring, now bloom, honeysuckle, spikenard, sweet sap, sweet suckle, sweet suck. Put me in your mouth that we might starve again. He sees a parricide hanged in a crossroads hamlet, and the man's friends run forward and pull his legs, and he hangs dead from the rope while urine darkens his trousers. To kill the father is a crime. Dance, they said, but he preferred to pray. How little we know of ourselves until the animal convenes. We could cast our vagaries in shawls of silk, build shrines from stolen teeth. And yet thirst compels the stuttered tongue. And so it started all again, washing the water with the water. When she arrived, her hands felt the evident loss of invocation, wasted flesh that dangled from a need. They wrapped their hands in ropes of hair, licked the rank salt from his body. They did this that they might begin anew and bring the body to the body once again, like a woman might possess herself, each hollow full of other, the taste of a man dying slowly in her mouth. He walked all night, and still he could see the fires behind him. This is a treatise on the past. When I opened the window, no birds flew in. Yet the properties of glass remained a tunnel to the sky. Life is a series of exiles. First the body, last the body. The dress lost its pleating. The dog ran away. Yet the sun was a maddening orange. It said, "Come to the night with a patch on your eye. Come to the sea with a hand-sewn sail." The dog returned with bleeding paws, trailing the scent of what it had known. Old boxes, paper ruins. Time remains directional, and linnets eat the flax from which the linen's made. And this last poem is the one from the poster. And thank you again for the design, which I really think is extraordinary. Don't leave it out yonder, somethin'll eat it. This is a hungry country. When you guide the rope along the flank, go steady and go slow. No rush into its blood of fear's last residue, lest we taste in the flesh some new distress and catch our teeth on the toughness of muscle. When you eat the sinew, gnaw the bone, when the fire dims and stars strike through the million pinholed sky, arm against the shadow, back against the night, good of your rope, good of your gloves, a company of metal, the firm lap of your gun. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Marcy. Next, we have Dawn Lundy Martin, who is a professor at the University of Pittsburgh and director of the Center for African American Poetry and Poetics, which she co-founded in 2006 with another one of our public poets, Terrence Hayes, who was here in 2006. She's also taught at Montclair State University, at the New School, and at Bard College. Last year, she published Good Stock, Strange Blood through Coffee House Press, and she's also published Life in a Box is a Pretty Life in 2014, which was awarded the Lambda Literary Award for Lesbian Poetry in 2016. She published Discipline in 2011. A Gathering of Matter, A Matter of Gathering in 2007 was awarded the Kane Kanem Poetry Prize. And she co-edited The Fire This Time, Young Activists and the New Feminism in 2004. In 2008, She was awarded the May Sarton Prize for Poetry from the Academy of American Arts and Sciences. She's the co-founder of the Third Wave Foundation in New York, a national grant-making organization led by young women and transgender youth, which focuses on social justice activism. Her poster poem, When the Bed is Empty, is featured on the Poetry Foundation's website. And of that poem, Meg Day has written, Dawn Lundy Martin's When the Bed is Empty punches through the gut of the inherited sonnet and remakes it anew as a silhouette or film negative, a thing we want to hold up to the light and handle with care. Martin's cadence pushes back on our expectations of how a line can shuttle the reader across and down the page, forcing us to move differently through the body of this poem, and so become a new body with it, holy in its refusal of predictable syntax and profane too in its loveliness. Martin has tailored this moment, this scene, to tend our private instincts and tap our deepest intuition. Welcome, Dawn Lundy Martin.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been thinking about what it means to have a poem be like a public poem as opposed to, and I was thinking about it because I think the way that I write is I usually think about the poem as a very kind of private utterance. And then there's this thing that happens when the moment the poem encounters the public and suddenly it's a public entity. I think this is a more public entity, being that it's not inside of a book. And it's thrilling to have that poem encounter the world in that way, so thank you. I'm going to read from my latest book, Good Stock, Strange Blood, which I was too scattered to bring additional copies of, so if you want to buy a copy, you can't do so here. But I'm sure that you'll use ingenuity in the form of the internet to make that happen. So this is Good Stock, Strange Blood is a strange book. I think of this work as a kind of series of utterances that are interconnected, so it's difficult to kind of mark, for me, sometimes where one poem begins and another one ends, because one is always dependent on the other. It's meant to be read as a whole book. And so because of that, actually, once I wrote the book, my publisher said, maybe you should write a prologue of some sort, give the book some context, etc. So I will read the prologue for you. I'm not sure it helps. Prologue. Oh, so the prologue is in the form of a question and answer. Question. If your book is a house, what does the foyer look like? The book is like a long, thin, wavy tendril stretched into the sky from a small spot at the top of my head. At the end of the tendril, somewhere far in the sky where I cannot see, is a mutilated black face. A little me is sitting on the top of my head, holding the tendril like the string to a balloon. Question. Whose blood? The blood is a corrupted document of one's fate, but when I am beautiful and young and open with no features that distort or take away from, it's easy for the stranger to enter the space of the body like a god. Does the blood become a further stain on wet, light feet? I don't know. A psychic once told me that I would live a very long life, epic, she said, like in a Russian novel. Really, it's only blood. Very symbolic. So many days I spend in bed, bleeding out of my vagina, so hungry I'm distorted. I call people to my bed until I feel depleted enough to sleep. Question. We are wondering why there is a small self. Maybe the prologue is your body? Because the question at the center of the book is, why doesn't one just die? And the little me is holding the thin line because there is a squashedness to existing in the present, and I can't think about question. What I like is that the little self is holding the tendril like a balloon because it gives me the impression that you were letting this mutilated thing go. I can't think about how to exist now without pressing together big pasts and small pasts, big pasts like historical collective trauma, and the narrow self-indulgent past of personal invasion, self-configuration at the hands of another, the mutilation of blood, the development of multiple. Anyway, the one who holds the weight of the past, the little one holds the weight of the past. Maybe she's already dead as she sits, who knows? But then, as I was writing the book, it was the summer of Sandra Bland, and then the summer of Freddie Gray, and then some cute kid was shot in a big box store while holding a toy gun, and so many others of these deaths unexplained, and the logics of the rationality we hold so dear, and the white boys are hand-slapped for brutal rapes. Life just goes on. The past isn't the past, but the present. It's all laid out in the same space/time plane. The tendril becomes like reaching into another dimension. Its symbolism changes. Question: why exhale after the inhale? The breathing is mantra. Could the trauma be keeping us alive? What happens is we walk through a door. On the other side of the door is a manifested future place. It's configured very differently from this one. Its shape is different, but we created it, so we recognize it. We understand its workings, which are mostly based on intuition. In the book, what's keeping us alive is the ability to imagine something very other than what's been shoved down our throats, what's been taken up in our cells. To imagine something other is to leave the known world. No death, but instead the door. To place a body alongside the grubby stranger, and then the stranger in a lockbox, and then voila. A self is 3 intentional selves, and the 3 intentional selves are like different manifestations of this thing we call blackness. And so there you have it. There's the prologue. A lot of this book is about trauma, and the section in the middle of the book is the one that moves from kind of collective historical trauma to personal trauma and back and forth. This is a section I'll read from the baby book. I'm so glad there's water. When I was sitting in my seat, I was just like, God, I hope there's water. God, I hope there's water. I'm so thirsty. To be in covering. To be in covering is the problem. Hunger caverns under this leather wrap from destitution, from split skull. Mother as brown as brawn and braided toward filth beneath, skin like wire, all our kin. From before it happened when dust underfoot, red dick stuck under guise of reason. Who summons us from darkness, from water well, one philtrum stitched to wolf tongue? Who tugs and rocks us, suckles, wet mouth? We is the purpose of the falling, swollen, our teeth hurt, their constant cutting, warm when sunken, wanted the swell of black earth, a legacy, something larger than ourselves to hold us. If I were looking from the outside, I'd think a thing ancient would not pulse so loudly, would be automatically removed from the atmosphere, lose its atomic structure, its relatability. We were driven, or we were rode hard, mule-like on feathers. This notion of sustainability, black vultures everywhere, neat white stars under wings, good at cleaning up road carcasses. What a mess, your weak veins, your lifelong addictions. What you then must witness is the vulture devouring the exposed red and fly-soaked, unrecognizable. The book, this book, the book of repression. All the stuff brilliantly blanking my throat, no dream remembered, no past reconstructed. He called it a kiss, but that was no kiss. Rises, dead breath into smoke. The writing is not balm. The eye in sleep is unreachable, subtle flesh, skin-warm milk, salt marsh, its simplicity without warning. In my early 30s, I had one recurring dream so vivid it began to feel like a memory rather than a dream. It's the only dream worth recounting. At some point, I no longer held the dream, just the memory of the dream told, and often I'd get confused as to the nature of non-dreamed life. In a giant old abandoned house at the top of a hill, it's night, and I am furtively burying a man's body under some floorboards. I pull up the floorboards, and then I'm outside digging a grave with my hands. It's easy, this digging, and I know there will be no evidence of this activity. I'm free to carve out soil in rough scoops. Even though I know I won't get caught, my body is racked with guilt, but I cannot stop. The burial is necessary and compelled, so I scrape the earth, bludgeon it with bloody fingers, and then place his body into the shallow grave, replacing the floorboards. No one will ever know. Elision into vowels, sunk in time. O sounds, oh, short, flat, ah, for as long as. My brother bends away from the hose that beats him. Basement is a watery place. I think of privacy in houses, what they allow for, their intimacy of enclosure. We never heard a word from over there, and they never heard a word from us. How the home seals off the world, creates a hole in the world, and there is no joy in that. To watch a teenage boy compressed and the heart still beats, his hiss is what hatred made. God will not save you. Mother at 83, labor or resurrection, is stunned to find out that people remember their dreams. Occasionally, she says, not vividly. I tell her, me too, but we are not like other people. I want to provide a metaphor for darkness. I want to tell you that the other day, while writing this very book, I became piercingly depressed, as if a bird had crashed into the window, and when I'm depressed, I want to feel worse because that can be a comfort. My brick feet, my open casket with the hole in my chest exposed so you can see right through the body, the glossy wood, through the floor, and then the layers of earth, catacombs and rites of passage. I searched for the man who notched the hole. Could not remember the spelling of the name in my mouth so many times. Shiny, perpendicular, my blank, 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 blank. Legions of waste in my body. Desecration, defunct, a symphony. I took a photo of him, this man, and realized it was not me in the casket at all, but him. I stuffed gauze in the wicker box. It has become life source. Fluent gnaw. Oh, This is where I keep him tucked. I say to myself, this is where he lives. His obituary is perfectly respectable. What is this dead language? No one will admit the facts of the matter, even though logbooks provide the material. They look at gloves and say, gloves, that's it, and you're hoisted up on the stretcher, paraded through crowded streets, contortion of hacked body, green grass, green grass, green grass, green grass grows. Only I see my stranger. I call for my stranger. I long for him. I look for him in the face of every black ghost on the edge of every piss-stinking park. Can taste Bacardi breath, the long toe of it, lapping against skin, pressure in what can't happen and does, an imprint. How the slender living room window looks out onto the street, a sofa perpendicular to window in front of TV, the kitchen table formica, my feet dangling. Or was it the motel that one time? Who allows, who doesn't say wait into a room of bicycles where the children fetch their toys, a thing you don't want can make you ravenous, can open the sturdiest lip with its faint presence. Okay, so I'm going to read from the poster, but I don't have the poster. So, they're open, okay. I'm going to steal one, that's okay. These poems are depressing, so, but in this one, this one is also depressing, but it ends on an up note, or I think it does. I think it ends on an up note. So I wrote this poem. So my dad died, and I wrote this poem after he died, but it is an attempt to grapple with also this moment when I was at a conference when he died in Iowa, and I was with one of my best friends, and couldn't get back. And then that night, we both woke up and saw this green light under the bed. You know, when you see something yourself, you're like, did I see it? But if another person is with you, you can definitely say that something was happening. So this is that moment. When the bed is empty, we pull the shades to block light. Light of resemblance to a memory, long light of waiting and impatience in the glows of it. The here of the now and the glow that days make in the room without the body, but with the stench of it. So we say vacancy and object against the was, against a philosophy of once and then not being against. A child once grew here, as lines on a wall, as growing without knowing what would one day not be. A gnawing grows, grew and was. Protection is curled, motionless. I envy her in her room, hers with paint and dolls and handprints, great green and glowing under blankets with a hand that nurtures the heart of the mouth, purrs into mouth, loves the heart, heart beating within another, blushing blood, God the beating, lit and doing what it does. Thank you.
Our fourth reader is Jen Ashburn. She works in Pittsburgh and describes herself as a writer and teacher. And on her LinkedIn page, she writes, "Sometimes it seems I'm wearing two hats, but language arts and business applications can intersect in interesting ways."
He's trying to get a job. Do what you gotta do.
We gave you a non-paying job here. Jen Ashburn spent several years in Asia, and many of her poems are infused with reference to Laos, Thailand, Japan, Vietnam, and China. She worked as an English teacher in Japan and has taught creative writing at the Allegheny County Jail. In 2016, she published The Light on the Wall, and she's also published poems in an anthology called Unconditional Surrender, an anthology of love poems, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, the Chiron Review, Gray Sparrow, the MacGuffin, and other journals. Our juror Fred Shaw's comments about Jen Ashburn's My Mother Drove Barefoot, her poster poem, are as follows. "I find a real sense of clarity within this poem that doesn't go overboard with unnecessary exposition. Beautifully detailed and haunting, the way so many childhood memories remain. It evokes a strong sense of sound that points to the mother's desperation and solitude, a lonely cry and a hum of tires and interstate. Nice pacing of the lines with strong line breaks that adds to the sense of movement and travel, while the figurative language points to an imaginative, knowing child. All of it allows for a moment of empathy for the mother, but keeps readers in the moment." Welcome, Jen Ashburn.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, and thank you all for being here and everyone that it took to make this event happen. It's a lovely event, and I am deeply honored. And I am thrilled to be sharing the stage with Dawn and Marcy and Thomas in absentia as well. So thank you all. So I'm going to start with a poem called Bed Sheets. When I remember that night, I can't recall if we had pork chops and broccoli for dinner, or ham and beans, or fried bluegill with stewed tomatoes. I don't know if we watched TV or sat on the back patio listening to crickets. I can say it was summer. The evening light soaked everything in the color of plums, not the skin of plums or the flesh, but that deep orange red that pleads in between. She was gentle at first, my mother. Then she said, "This is how they restrain you in hospitals." She tucked the sheets hard under the mattress, trapping my arms, legs, shoulders, my surprised ribs. How old was I? Strong enough to untuck the sheets and crawl out of bed, but I didn't. Into the night, I listened for her return footsteps and startled at every old house creak. What I remember from that night is this: my mother's unsteady eyes behind her thick-rimmed glasses, and squares of light gliding across the bedroom wall. Light through the window. Light from the station wagons and pickup trucks that said, so patiently, "There is a road." My mother was breaking. Even the light on the wall knew. So I write a lot of personal poetry. My mother suffered from schizophrenia, and I tried really hard to avoid writing about it, but half my book is about my mother, so it happens. And so this next poem will be the poem that's on the poster, and I'm going to follow it up with kind of a companion poem. And since you're actually here, you get like the secret backstory of what inspired the poem. So I grew up in southern Indiana, the state, not Indiana, Pennsylvania. And my mother was from New York State, and she took us, my brother and I, to New York for the summer. And as it turned out, she didn't have any intention to bring us back, so my father had to come and kind of rescue us, and that's the basis of the poem. All right, and the title is the first line, so I'll just jump right in. Our mother drove barefoot and pushed that Chevy hard over the hills and through the night. My brother and I slept like drunk bees while she took us to the end of our childhood. Hooked on classics played from a portable tape player until the batteries died. The last note stretched thin, the tuba sounding like an oboe, the oboe like a cow giving birth with her lips held shut. A lonely cry in a hum of tires in interstate. Such a long trip for her, driving. Such a long, difficult labor. And this poem is called The Rescue. Every night I prayed, Our Father who art in Indiana, rescue us from our mother's land of milk and delusional honey. And he did. A knight in armor worn thin, he careened over highways in his silver old starfire, swept us away from our mother's schizophrenia to his post-divorce house of concrete floors and yard sale furniture. We began our happily ever after in a cool, dark kitchen, on saltine crackers and thick slices of ham. Hallelujah, praise the Formica table and aluminum pans. In the quiet of the morning, we began again. And I have a few more family poems. This one is called Anxiety. And I don't see any young children here. There's some bad words, so do what you got to do. Cover your ears, leave the room. They're not horrible, so. Anxiety. My brother calls, which causes me anxiety, partly because I don't like phone calls, but mostly because he grumbles about how he can't find a job, how his truck won't start, how his wife's car needs a new transmission, about how his wife is a bitch, and I want to say, don't talk like that. Not about your wife, although I know she can be a bitch at times, but who isn't at times? Although she takes too many pills, as he does, which is more of a problem if he asks me, which he doesn't. But not in front of the kids, I want to say. Easy for single aunts to give marital advice, child-rearing advice. But I hear my nephew in the background say, Dad, and my brother answer, not now, son. And I remember how my brother and I watched the highway for our father's green Ford, watched car after car after car, wondering when he would come, if he would come. This is why I can hear my nephew's anxiety, the nagging dad after dad after dad, and know it means don't leave, and know that my brother hears it too. And this one is called Nesting. Sometimes in sleep I find her in a house that's forever walnut floors, French doors, spider plants in macrame hangers. Dad's not there, nor my brother, just her, me, and the homemade calico print blinds. Tonight she's rearranging the furniture. She pulls out the sofa and sweeps the dust. She does not see me in the kitchen by the jars of pickled green tomatoes. She is alone, whispering incantations as she drags the dining room table to a corner, heaves the Barbra Streisand records onto a shelf, stacks firewood neatly by the stove. Is it winter? I wonder if she's found the baby mice asleep in a cabinet drawer upstairs, warm and tangled in a skein of yarn. It's quiet there among the crochet hooks and styrofoam spools of thread. I can feel the pulse of their suckling. I can hear their long dead heartbeats hidden in the dander and lint. So I'd like to switch gears a little bit. And I was lucky enough to spend some time in Asia. I lived in Japan for 3.5 years, having a midlife crisis, which actually I recommend. I think it's healthy if you don't get carried away. And then I had about 6 months, so I was able to travel around, mostly Southeast Asia and a little bit in China. This is called Arriving in Bangkok. Buddha Day, today only. Free admission at Standing Buddha, Lucky Buddha, Black Buddha. This is what the tuk-tuk driver tells me. I will take you. You must go today. Then the next day, another driver says, Buddha Day today. Every day is Buddha Day here. Every day, today only. The next poem references a William Wordsworth poem. The line from the Wordsworth poem is, "The child is father of the man," and it's from "My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky." This takes place in Hanoi, and the title is the first line, so again, I'll just jump right in. A girl named Hong, which means moon, sits next to me on a bench by Westlake. She pretends to watch the striations in the still water, but eventually asks what I'm writing. "Poetry," I say. "I love poetry," she says. "Please read me your poem," and I do. Then she says, "Tell me a famous poem," and I spout Wordsworth. I ask for some Vietnamese poets, and she writes 4 names in my notebook. "What do they write?" I ask. "Love poems," she answers, with a half smile. "I believe in love," she adds, and then, "What do you believe in?" I don't know, but say something anyway, something liberal and enlightened, respect, equality. She nods like she agrees. We part ways, and I walk until street lamps replace the afternoon sun. The lake water turns dark. Traffic chants in the background with a constant peppering of motorbike horns. The child is father of the man, and all the young believe in love. When did I stop believing? A hazy neon glows above the trees. A soft breeze shifts dust across the sidewalk, and the moonlight quivers on the water, constant in its movement, natural as breath. This next poem takes place in Laos. Some people say Laos. I say, well, Lao. It's after Yona Harvey. I greatly admire her book, Hemming the Water. And she has some poems that have a very distinctive pattern across the page, kind of going up and down. And that's what I emulated in this poem. The kind young man with the shy smile. Women in America have much power, he says, driving his van carefully over the red clay roads of Laos. Women have much power, his uncle who lives in Hawaii told him. If a man hits his wife, the police will come. Women have power. The van driver whom I paid to drive these roads has a wife, a pregnant wife, and a 4-year-old daughter. He is nice to me. All the men in Laos are nice to me. He drives carefully and talks about rice harvesting with his family. He waits patiently while I take photos and think, is this a man who hits his wife? He waits patiently while I take photos of Piawat Temple, which we, Americans, destroyed in 1968, except for a stubborn Buddha, a resilient statue charred black. I cannot ask about his wife. Why don't you marry, he asks over noodles. In Laos, you cannot live alone, he says. In Laos, family is everything. And I'd like to shift gears one more time and read some newer poems. And I started off writing almost exclusively personal poetry, but getting a little crazy these days, so I'll try some stuff out on you. This one is called The Scribes. We told the scribes the sunflowers had died, that the pears were rotting in their baskets. They listened and wrote down our words in the same scrolls used to record the law, and in the same handwriting, thin lines like the hair on a sassafras root. We told them about the sage coughing in the sun, the hydrangea nodding toward the storm clouds, the goldenrod slurring to the wind, and they wrote. They wrote and wrote and wrote, pausing only when tree rain fell on the backs of their necks or fire ants bit at their ankles. For months and years, they translated our garbled existence like a promise, and we trusted them to understand its sorrow and unyielding sweetness. They wrote in thin lines, like faint veins on the surface of the skin. They wore gossamer robes like dew-drenched cobwebs. They were old. We thought they would die, but they didn't. Instead, they moved deep into the woods, following the raccoon trails, and lived on quail eggs and walnuts. They stopped writing, but we still had their scrolls, thin lines like unnoticeable bone fractures. They stopped writing, but we still heard their voices. They sang of dying plants and the stench of rotten fruit. We didn't understand, but we remembered telling the story. We remembered our own stories, pulsing in their own thin ways. And I have almost a brand new one. It's still a work in progress. I like to try to read at least something new at each reading. So thanks for being the guinea pig. This is called Yes, I Am a Woman of Unusual Obsessions. It's like this, the same dream over 100 years, honeysuckle and chain link fence, the easy ritual of a willow dipping its branches in a Sweetwater creek. There's always a crossing over, a precipice, or the rattle of an aluminum gate. Then the grass root breaks under my boot steps. A mauve sky glows over the pastures and oak trees. I know the primal limestone dissolves into a cavern. Sometimes I find an opening and burrow through. Sometimes I wait for the collapse to devour me. This isn't the dream where I fall and fall and fall, then bungee myself awake. It's more like a trap door, half rotten with termites, that opens to a cellar of dusty tomato jars. Who owns the tomatoes, the cellar, the door? I return to the same landmarks like cattle to a salt lick. Yes, I am an animal obsessed with taste and the things I've forsaken. I carve petroglyphs in boulders that decay in slow, defiant silence. They root so solidly under my knife. See how the palimpsest of scars barely quivers. I have two more. This next one is probably the only happy poem I have. They're quite rare. So this is called Lemon Sun. It's one of those days. The dogwood bloomed too early, the snow came late, and here we are in our steam heat apartment. The Christmas lights we never put away, still blinking above the empty fireplace. You in the shower, me on the couch staring out the window as the wind twists the white petals and fat snowflakes down. When sunlight spills through the tree limbs bright as lemon. A mythic beauty no one believes, purple sky, emerald leaves, everything yellow halo and glow. And I want to call you. I want you to see it, standing naked in our living room, dripping water on our oak floor. But I know this moment's a hummingbird's breath in the Pleistocene age, that the day is fragile, that you'd rush out to find gray flowers, gray snow. Still, here we are, in the radiator's steady heat, and outside, the determined spring, and the strange, incomprehensible joy of the careless snow. I want to give out one more great big huge thank you, and especially to Caroline for herding us like cats. At least I'm a cat. Thanks for herding. And also a great job by the ASL interpreters. They're working hard. This takes place in Thorsmork, Iceland. It's called Mountain Split. In the center of the mountain, we follow each other's boots, step weak-ankled on loose stones, arrive one by one to the indifferent hospitality of the waterfall. The crash of water vibrates through us. Icicles dangle from moss walls and catch sunlight. We stand between green shadows, and it feels like a reckoning, a graffiti of my sins in the creek pebbles, my awkward ways splayed open in the canyon split. We stand in neon jackets with the arias of barbarians on our lips, the struggle to sing pursuing us like a reluctant orgasm. We stand in the center of the mountain where ice and lichen thrive, and we open our foolish human hearts to worship it. Thank you.
Our evening is not over yet. Please stick around. come down, meet our poets, take some poetry home with you tonight. But before we do that, we want to extend one more thank you for an amazing evening. Please join me in thanking Bill Brockman and our poets tonight, Thomas, Marcy, Dawn, Jen. Thank you. And thank you to each and every one of you for coming out tonight.